So today is lesson 12. It's our last lesson. We shouldn't be too long today. We will be done by 1 o'clock, if not earlier. So what are we going to do? I'm going to review the final exam. I know I talked about it last week, but I'm going to go over it one more time. The exam will be during class time next week. So the exam opens at 11 and you have to submit by 2 o'clock. When I say 11 to 2, that doesn't mean you can sign in at 1:50 and submit at 4:50. So you actually have to submit by 2 o'clock. Okay, I'm going to go over assignment 2, part 3, which is really short. What I'm going to strongly recommend is as soon as we're done today, do assignment 2, part 3. It should not take you any longer than about 10 minutes. You're just going to scaffold some code and upload it to GitHub in easy 5%. And it's based on today's lesson. So my recommendation is don't put that off for a week. Take 5 minutes when we're done today and do assignment 2, part 3. We will look at that. Then we're going to explore API terminology. We're going to look at scaffolding an API in a couple different ways using Visual Studio, and we're going to use Postman to test out our API. We're also going to look at a tool called Swagger, which is great because it automatically generates documentation that describes how our API is going to work. So our final exam. So next week, I will be sure to open the WebEx room by 10:50 a.m. at the latest. Okay, so you're going to sign into WebEx at that time. You are going to need a Git repository for your project, for your exam. You can create that ahead of time if you want. So you can create a new repository, make sure it's private, make sure you invite me. Also, please do not put any files in the repository yet. Don't create or make sure you don't create a README file, a git ignore, or anything. Just a blank repository that you can invite me to. So you are free to do that before the exam, then you don't have to take up time during the exam next week. I'm going to give you a project and you are going to work on it, and the exam will be randomized. So not everybody is going to be asked to do the exact same types of things. How can you study for the exam? Well, my best suggestion is take an honest look at your assignment and see what other features, what could you do to improve your assignment? So what other features might you add, or what things are working, but maybe they don't look great, or they're not as polished or as user-friendly as they should be. So take your assignment. If you work on it and polish it, that's going to be good practice for the final exam. Okay? You also should be prepared during the exam. I'm telling you this now. You're going to need to make a new commit every 30 minutes. So you're not just committing all your work at the end of 3 hours. Every 30 minutes, I'm going to remind you to make a new commit. And this is for 2 reasons. Number one, that way you're not going to be in danger of losing your work, of working for 3 hours and then suddenly having your computer die, something like that, and you can't commit your project. Number two, there's a bit of an honor system here because you're all working from home. So if you commit every 30 minutes, yeah, I know this is Jarrett's idea, Kevin. So I'm going to have you do the same thing, okay? Because that also shows me your process. We've seen examples of exams in the past, particularly even in-person exams, where we observe that a student really isn't doing any work or able to accomplish anything, and then miraculously their final submission, they submit a perfect exam, which suggests that something is not above board. So if your final submission doesn't show any progress from your earlier commits, that's going to raise some questions about how you did the exam. So it's also partly around maintaining the integrity of the exam. Are there any questions? There are no tricks, but I am going to ask you to apply the things we've done to solve some different problems. Yes, Taylor, the exam is from 11 until 2. So you have to submit at 2 o'clock. Mike, it's a little difficult for me to answer that question because I try not to reuse my exam. So I've never given this particular one before. So I can't comment on that.
Rich,
Yes.
are there specific videos we can go over to um, just kind of go over some base things then when studying? Like, are there videos you can suggest, like specific ones or
Well,
specific
it's a little tricky,
lessons?
Miguel. Good, fair question. It's a little tricky to to comment on specifically. Had we had a midterm exam, I would have said focus on the second half of the course. But because we didn't have a midterm exam,
Oh, okay.
um, really I can cover anything. The stuff we did in the first couple of weeks, that's going to be fairly elementary. Like, I'm not going to ask you to create a new project. I know you already know how to do that, for example. I'm not asking you to connect to a database because I'm going to do the database connection. I will set up the database for you. But
Oh, okay.
authentication, APIs, unit testing, creating your own custom methods and views, all of these things are fair game.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, okay, that's a bit more, yeah.
Kevin, I think it's reasonable to say that uh, that's probably true of any programming activity. Troubleshooting is always a huge part of the work. I mean, think about even, I'm delivering these lessons to you guys, right? By the time I do a lesson for you, I've already taught this lesson twice in the previous 7 days, and I have a lesson plan with everything I want to say and all the code samples. And how many times have I gone through the code and done it perfectly? Probably never, right? So that's just what programming is like. We write some code, we try it, we get an error, we go back and debug. That's just the normal process. So try not to let that frustrate you that you're spending time in the exam debugging things. That's just that it's impossible to do coding without debugging. It's part and parcel of it. So it's perfectly normal to be spending time troubleshooting things. That's really what programming is.
Um, can you give us like maybe like a small list of things that you for sure won't ask us? Like I know we don't have to connect to an Azure database, but like do we still have to know how to like set up like a straight payment?
Thank you. Yes, I did want to mention that Stripe is not in the exam at all. It was not part of the course learning outcomes. I just thought it was a useful thing for us to be able to cover, and it integrated well with the rest of our application. So you do not spend any time on Stripe. It's not going to be required.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big relief. Okay, yeah. Thanks for asking that, Lindsay.
Yes, I appreciate you asking. I did mean to mention that. Stripe was really it wasn't totally out of scope, but it's not a required learning piece for the course. I felt it was a useful learning piece for your careers, so I included it. Okay, so let's move on to assignment 3. I know I'm giving you lots of assignments lately, but honestly, this one really is very small. I told my Monday class, do it as soon as class was done, and probably 2/3 of the class did it right away. I've already marked it. Okay. It's not due until next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Honestly, just do it today. It's very small. You actually have to write 0 lines of code for assignment 3, assignment 2, part 3. So here it is. I'll just go over it again. So do next Tuesday, but I want you to do it today while our API lesson is fresh in your mind. Just give me the same repository link. If your site is running on Azure, that's great. Then give me the link to your API controller and enable You can turn your site on. If Azure is not working, don't worry about it. That's fine. If it does work on Azure, so much the better. It just means I can grade it all that more quickly. So in your project, add a new subfolder. Actually, let me just subfolder in the controllers folder. I'll update this on Blackboard. So underneath controllers, you're going to make a new folder called API. You're then going to scaffold a web API controller with CRUD functionality. Visual Studio will write all the code. Commit it to GitHub. You only have to make one commit. You can publish your site if Azure is still working. That's it. Honestly, this will take 5 minutes. And Kevin, we're going to be done early today, so if you're meeting Jarrett later, you'll still have time to do this. Don't worry. I will just update the document. It basically is a free 5%. I've already marked the Monday class. Every single student who did it got 5%. Okay, and we do still have a quiz that's due also next Tuesday. Again, because I'm going to cut class short today, we don't need a full 3 hours. I would recommend use that time between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, do assignment 2 part 3, do the quiz, and then you can just study for the exam. And you have no other work to do in this course. Okay? Okay, so we want to start to talk about, today we want to look at using Visual Studio and building a web API with Dotnetcore. .NET, as it does with many other things, it makes it really easy. So I'm going to pause my screen share and my recording in a minute. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you about just 5 minutes for this. And you're going to do some research just on your own, but depending on which group you're in, which you can see on Blackboard, I've given you a term I want you to provide a definition for. And don't just go to Wikipedia and give me what Wikipedia says. Give me a definition that like the average person can understand. That's not too technical. Okay, so if you are in group 1, I want you to research the word API. What does it mean? And how would you explain it to a non-technical person, like a family member or roommate? If you're in group 2, I want you to research the term REST. If you're in group 3, I want you to research the term put. If you're in group 4, I want you to research the term URI. In group 5, research the term, the HTTP status code 400. So you don't need a breakout room, just do your own research, make a note of what you find, and then we'll review all our answers in about 5 minutes. I'll just ask you to use the chat when I call on your group, and then I'll add some of your explanations to Blackboard for everybody. Okay, so you can find your group number. It's the same groups you've been working in the breakout sessions previously. So find your group, find a definition that matches your group number. And I'll give you 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. I'll pause the recording, and at 11:20, I believe so, yes. So you're only, each of you is just only look, yeah, okay, then Taylor, so there you go. So you're looking up API. Okay, so I will pause my recording for a few minutes. Do your best research, and we'll see what you found out in a few minutes.